Good afternoon. It's a privilege to be here. What a terrific panel. From the arts this afternoon and evening of design, we heard earlier about the dramatic changes poised for East Midtown. The Municipal Art Society has asked three renowned architecture firms, WXY, Foster & Partners, and SOM, to engage in a design challenge, the Next 100. In the 1970s, when I was quite young and working at the Municipal Art Society, we had the great good fortune to have Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis offering her help to save Grand Central. She was instrumental, as you all know, in the preservation of Grand Central Terminal. But now, on the heels of Grand Central's in February's centennial, we at the Municipal Art Society thought it was time to pay as much attention to the areas surrounding Grand Central as we have had in the past with the terminal. With 700,000 users passing through the terminal each day, East Midtown is as vibrant as ever. What might its future look like? How can we as a city continue to encourage bold thinking and imaginative design? I'm excited to share these results with you, but first, I'm proud to premiere this video on the Next 100 and introduce to you Jenna McKnight, the editor-in-chief of our media partner, Architizer, and the producer, to tell you a little bit more about it.
Hello, I'm Jenna. I'm the editor-in-chief at Architizer, which, if you're not familiar with us, we're the leading news and social networking site for architects, designers, and design enthusiasts. We're very excited to have worked with MASS on producing this video. Essentially, the video showcases the work of three firms, SOM, WYX, I knew I would do that, WXY, and Foster & Partners, and their proposals for revamping the area around Grand Central Terminal. I don't want to waste time, so without further ado, here is the video.
It's really a project that's about New York City. There's really nothing more essential to New York than knowing where Grand Central Station is so you could meet someone there.
It's really about people. It's about the pedestrian realm, the pedestrian experience. This is the heart of New York. Imagine such a thing, and how could it be better?
Grand Central Station, we all know, is one of the greatest railroad terminals in the world. It's really surrounded very, very closely by a very dense urban fabric, and there's no room to breathe.
We all think of this area as Midtown, office buildings, business, people working. And we do this because we're New Yorkers. But when we stop and think about it, this is a huge tourist destination.
We start thinking about the public realm and what can be improved, because clearly inside the station it has this wonderful hall, but when you hit the streets surrounding the station, there are some clear urban issues. On 42nd Street, the main entrance is actually underneath the bridge. You can't even see it from a distance. You have to really know that it's there.
How can you make a coherent, sort of identifiable public space in the heart of New York City?
If we think about the public realm in cities and the way people move around the cities, the glue that holds the buildings together, that really is what makes a city so great. And I love Manhattan mainly because it's a city of streets. It's not a city of towers.
A lot of our work is really about the public realm. It's about activating the public realm.
I think that we try and push this idea of how much more exciting infrastructure can be, and we look for opportunities where the stuff of the street and the public realm can really kind of play more.
New York City is a city that reinvents itself. The idea of elevating pedestrian experiences, elevating it physically, getting it off the ground, maybe even in some cases changing street patterns or reclaiming streets which are public spaces.
We are very well used to working with historic fabric and respecting that fabric. It's essential, but at the same time, it's also essential to move forward. It's a matter of looking back and trying to get the building back closer to what it originally was conceived to be.
That transformation that Wilgus conceived was one of the biggest things ever to happen in New York City. So Can that happen again? We think yes is the answer, but it's going to take some free thinking and some different kind of thinking.
It sometimes takes a very small tilt of the rudder through a few interventions that can be followed in the future for many, many years to come, for the next 100 years.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome MAS Board Director Hugh Hardy.
Well, that's the beginning of the story, and the city's given us a rare opportunity to make Midtown better. A previous generation produced the astonishing accomplishment of Grand Central and its creation of a new Midtown. Over 100 years ago, the New York Central Railroad Company held a limited architectural competition. Whoops, I want to go back. Take me back. Thank you. Over 100 years ago, the New York Central Railroad Company held a limited architectural competition for design of a new railroad terminal to replace the existing one on 42nd and Park. It invited a small group of distinguished firms to offer ideas for a new train station, housing commuter trains on a lower level and long-distance trains on an upper level. All the land it owned and used for railroad yards to the north of the station would be developed as new buildings, including creation of a great new boulevard, Park Avenue. This was made possible by a new system of electric locomotion, and to indicate the ambition of the project, here's a design by McKnight White, who also designed the lamented Penn Station. It was not selected. If built, this would have been the tallest building in the world. It included a 300-foot-tall jet of water spraying from the top of the building and illuminated with red lights, a major innovation for a new Midtown. What we got instead was a collaboration between Whitney Warren and Reed and Stem that includes the land to the north developed as Terminal City, defined by buildings with a uniform style and cornice height. Building the terminal not only gave us a major boulevard, but a great public concourse connected with the city in multiple ways. It also provided a great public space that continues to energize everything around it. As connections with the surrounding city have increased, however, much of what's been added fails to equal this in quality, and no other important public space has been added. Although costing millions, new connections fail to inspire, and vertical connections with the new Long Island Railroad station under Grand Central and Vanderbilt Avenue promise little better experience. Our challenge is now, how can we, 100 years later, produce great new public spaces that enhance the legacy of the Grand Central Concourse? What should the new Midtown look like? Some believe this is the opportunity for the type of new iconic structures found other places in the world. Should this be our future? If so, what is the plan? Taking our lead from the original competition, we've asked 3 contemporary and distinguished design firms, Foster and Partners, Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, and WXY, to offer their creative ideas about how we might continue to reimagine the community around Grand Central and East Midtown. The results are wide-ranging and thought-provoking, and what is clear, from the most ambitious to the most specific, is that extended and improved public space must be at the heart of its future. We applaud the city for this conversation with the proposed rezoning of Midtown, and we very much look forward to working to ensure we seize this opportunity. There are many difficult and important decisions ahead, but there's also a lot at stake for this generation if we are to continue to improve the city in ways that will inspire New Yorkers for the next 100 years. It's now my great pleasure to introduce three great design firms, beginning with Claire Weisz, the founding principal of WXY, Architecture and Urbanism, Roger Duffy, partner at Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, and Sir Norman Foster of Foster Partners. Take it away, Claire.
Hugh and MAS, thank you. We were rather inspired by the title, The Next 100, and kind of took that on as a chance to look at really the role urban design and planning could play in thinking about our next 100 years. Of course, like Hugh said, the greatest thing to do when you have the luxury of looking back is to look back at the last 100 years. Grand Central, Bryant Park, Times Square. Now, Grand Central had the benefit of a pretty amazing subterranean network. It was ahead of Bryant Park and Times Square. In fact, it was ahead of almost every other piece of infrastructure in the United States. There we go. That's what it looked like. This was America when Grand Central Station was built. This is Grand Central Station in America today. Truly a regional hub, but when it was barely holding on and it needed to be rescued, in this case by the Pan Am building, the airlines, there was still a huge amount of ambition for this regional hub, and as you can see, Popular Science thought it was the most complicated building ever built. There it is under construction, and here we are. So our three protagonists today in the present are Grand Central, the MetLife building, formerly known as the Pan Am, and off to the right, the Chrysler building. And again, Grand Central and the car have a very interesting relationship today. This is our regional hub, as Hugh alluded to, less than inspiring. Important, extremely important, so important that we're building a subterranean cavern, but not the kinds of things we're seeing in other parts of the world for this level of effort. The other passion for Grand Central is the myth. It's the sky, it's looking up, it's our skyline, as Amanda Burden talked about. It's what we do when we're not looking at our feet trying to figure out where to go. Now, if you look up at Grand Central, there's this interesting figure that is a hybrid, horse and winged figure, that says a lot about transportation. So we see this project as taking us into the future where we have helpers that take us to many places, and therefore we can reinterpret architecture in many different ways. And there's many people who can enjoy Grand Central on many levels. So the next 100 years. I'll go through this quickly. If you just take a quick survey of all of the things that might happen, those tracks, the subway lines, but we will still need them, but for what? Maybe we'll flock together our cars into things that look like trains. Maybe we'll get beyond Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. But it's all really about sharing things. Maybe that, there'll be a hologram zoo and who knows? But these things, the idea is that the public spaces that we're going to make have to be able to handle all of this. So let's talk about our hybrid future. And we wanted to be able to share with you this model that we made. So this is going from top to bottom. You can see the shuttle. And we'll post this, but it's really enjoyable actually to finally understand what's stacked on top of what in Grand Central. Unbelievably complex. So one way to think about this is how our pedestrian car hybrid future. So just to go through today, we have the Park Avenue Viaduct. it's all cars. In fact, it was one of the first pieces of infrastructure built, car only. There's no sidewalks on it, and that was conscious. In the near future, there's enough room that you could offset the Park Avenue Viaduct and use one side, maybe the east side, for cars, and then you have a chance to use the west side, the Vanderbilt Avenue side, for bicycles. Our next provocateur in the city, pedestrians, and public open space. Here's a close-up. So you go around, and you potentially move the bridge, and then the car still comes through the viaduct the way it does now. And today, on Saturdays in the summer, and maybe permanently. We talked a lot about postcard views. I think that we all know that Grand Central could be so much more spectacular. And how do we do that? We could do that by actually setting buildings back and creating these new kinds of buildings, moving away from Grand Central and finding a way to put natural light back in Grand Central. There's all these windows that in fact used to have a lot more natural light than they do today, especially before the the MetLife building was built. So let's just talk about the hybridization of transportation into park. How do we do this? Let's go through existing entrances. There are 3 big opportunities to enter the Lex line, the shuttle, and East Side access. And ideally, these come from new public spaces, not just those kinds of entrances at the bottoms of buildings that can get locked after 9 o'clock. We all know those. So as I talked about, it's not above your head, but it's also about below your feet, and inspired by Grand Central. We are looking at all those amazing spaces in Chicago and other places where you really understand that you're floating, that there's all those layers of the city, including in Grand Central. Many of you have not gone onto the glass bridges and the big windows in Grand Central, but they're spectacular. And there they are. And they could be outside too. And Vanderbilt Avenue itself could be a kind of glass bridge. So this is that dream of looking at sites, thinking about combining them into buildings that have enough space around them. I quickly want to go through this next idea, which is, and Hugh showed the escalators, so I think our dream of the escalators is you go up into a park. So it's not the bottom of the Pan Am, it's actually the Pan Am base cleared out and a new kind of space there, and it is possible. The Pan Am building wasn't always there, and the elevator cores could be well accommodated with this new floating building. Maybe there's an aquarium up there even, and other things, and who knows, there could be that treehouse lounge. So, finally, as I alluded to at the beginning of this is not just about Grand Central. This is about the 3 living rooms in Midtown. And really, we've done Bryant Park, we've done Times Square, but Grand Central is yet to be reimagined. So just a little bit on where we were and where we are now. And I think we're really looking at a game-changing situation, right? And here we are. This potential of a kind of lifeblood of public space being reinserted, this potential of mixing it up with what a site is. This is one place in the city you could shift some access spots around, make some sites bigger, some smaller. Maybe this is it. And you can kind of see maybe the Lex line would be a lot better if it wasn't trying to support a hotel right on top of it. And then finally, going back out again. This kind of infrastructure game plan back to the Pan Am under construction, these new kinds of public spaces and buildings under construction, hybrid buildings maybe, new kinds of working, bigger floors, smaller floors, the kind of buildings that have air and space throughout them, and back to our three protagonists, and maybe in order to forward all of this, but also to live different ways, we can put another character into this. And that's it.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here representing SOM, and I'd like to congratulate MAS for fostering a very important dialogue that's incredibly important to the city. They imagined the question around the subject of the pedestrian, so our idea is framed around that prioritization. There's always been lots of urban growth in New York City, and there's always been a corresponding civic response. So some big civic responses have been the grid from 1817 that tried to organize growth to the north. When the rail lines came into the city, the great train rooms at the terminus of those train lines, the great public parks to relieve congestion and have some place for the people of New York to ambulate, and finally zoning, which various iterations of tried to create a disciplined way that growth would happen in a physical form. So like Claire, we have our own idea of what the previous 100 years were about, and many things happen. I think that was the point of both of these. Grand Central Station, two forms of zoning, one that dealt with light and air on the street, so kind of a qualitative point of view there from zoning. And 1961 zoning was about incentivizing developers to create public space, another kind of qualitative advancement for strictures of the city. More recently, repurposed infrastructure that have created great public amenities in the city, and then very important city green initiatives that have actually been written into zoning codes to support this kind of important future look at the environment. So the next 100 years is a long time. Many significant things can happen in the next 100 years. So we were imagining a kind of magical 100 years. And to preface that, we went back to the city planning document. Here outlined are the density proposals that they have. And on average, there's a 50% increase in this area being proposed for the FAR, quite significant. As mentioned previously, one of the other speakers, there's 70 million square feet, and a significant amount of future square feet is being planned, so very dense. The East Side Access is coming in as well, and the East Side Access will bring a large percentage increase in density in populations to an already very crowded area. And when you add in the increased density of FAR, there's something like an 18 or 20% increase in the overall density of people in this area. So very significant. How would the public streets and sidewalks deal with such a condition? So this is our reading of that document, not to be critical, but just to observe that there is an imbalance, perhaps, between urban growth and a civic response. Let's call it public space for the sake of this presentation. So we're suggesting a balance between these two conditions, perhaps, in the next 100 years. And we have three very specific proposals that we have created visualizations of. So the first one is about mitigating the increased density in this area from the East Side Access and the increased FAR. Second is a proportional relationship between additional FAR and density and pedestrian space, public space. And third, to leverage this investment beyond a Class A office core for Manhattan to create a 24-hour heart to New York City that also includes tourism, which is a huge economic driver of New York City. So We've mapped, our team has mapped, they're all here today. Great job, team. But they've mapped here consequences of 1961 zoning. They're called POPs, P-O-P-S, so privately owned public space. And you can see here on this mapping that these are all public spaces that are privately owned, but they're like confetti. There's no aggregation, there's no whole created out of the sum of the parts for these spaces that exist in the city as a consequence of zoning. There's going to be this increased density that's radiating out, as previously mentioned, from Grand Central Station. And some of these public spaces, the Holly White Way, are linked together, but that's the only form of aggregation of these existing spaces. So we're imagining reinstituting the Grand Walkway up Park Avenue as it formerly existed as a way to relieve congestion and reestablish something that was part of New York, call it a kind of historic preservation. And secondly, we're thinking of creating easements through private properties if they want to create new builds in the future that would aggregate together these existing POPs as a consequence of 1961 zoning, so as a way to relieve pedestrian connection in the city. Just some visual images of what that might look like. So diagonalized corner, entrances through blocks, and you walk through and you might focus on particular landmarks or destinations within the city. So that's the first subject. The second is to perhaps transform privately owned public spaces, POPs, into something else in the next 100 years, an elaboration, privately funded public spaces. So they get density and perhaps they need to invest in new forms of public space. And the recognition that there are existing strata of public space just doesn't exist on the ground plane in the city. It exists below, and we're suggesting now it might exist above the street level, more proximate to light and air, one of the original tenets of the 1916 zoning. A depiction of bringing sunlight down through the project, all the way down to the east side access and the future rail connections I heard someone mention earlier to the airports and perhaps connecting to Penn Station. So an artistic rendition of what that below grade space might look like with an improved qualitative condition of natural light for humans below grade. And then moving public spaces that could help you ambulate from these very deep constructions up to the surface of the ground in a glass enclosure, so you're not sort of confined to an escalator tube for 5 or 10 minutes on the way from below grade to the street level. Below grade with a wash of sunlight, very pleasant space, and then the street level where there might be some easements along Vanderbilt and a elongation of Depew Place, maybe carving away some of the privately owned site or taking away some of Vanderbilt to bring these light wells down to these subterranean public spaces. So the last idea here is to create a 24-hour heart to this area, so leveraging this idea of a Class A office core. Tourism is the 5th largest economic generator in the city. And we're thinking about creating a new form of public space that could be a dynamic. It moves from just on top of Grand Central Station all the way up to very high positions at the top of these skyscrapers. This new form of public space would be made out of something new age material like carbon fiber and pneumatically driven, and it would be supported off of these private buildings. So the infrastructure to support such a public space would be supported from private buildings, so publicly funded private space. This would be done at the scale of the city. It would be memorable. It's different than a skyscraper piercing the sky. It's a kind of memorable world object, but done in a way that celebrates the public nature of space as opposed to the private nature of a building. This is one of the docking stations, much like an airport jet bridge docks to an airplane from a private building. And in this public space, looking out and understanding the city above the very heart of the city, so kind of observatory, and perhaps some new age technology that explains what you're looking at when you come to such a space. So again, this icon is about as large as Union Square, so something memorable, something that is world-class, something that would capture the imagination of the world, not just of New York City. And here's a mapping of it from, let's say, Google Earth sometime in the future, and you can see it's of a significant scale. So thank you very much. It was a privilege to contribute these ideas.
Good afternoon. New York is not just the great city. It is also the greenest city in the United States, and arguably in the world. And that's been well charted, but I think it's just worth reminding ourselves why that is so. As a model, it's a high-density city. It is pedestrian friendly. It has a high dependence on public transport. It's pedestrian friendly. Along with London and Toronto, has less than 50% car ownership. It has a rich mix of uses, layering, and arguably most important of all, a high quality of public space, 20% green area, Central Park, and that for us gave the clue in terms of how we address some of the challenges of Grand Central. It is a great indoor space and one of the greatest in the world, and it raises certain challenges in terms of the well-charted statistics. I'm having a little difficulty changing this image. The numbers have been very well charted, 750,000 passing through, 1 million at peak days, and in a way perhaps repeating some of the background of the previous contributions. But it is worth noting that in the near 100 years, as it approaches its 100th birthday, that the throughput has multiplied by a factor of 10, whilst essentially the fabric has been fairly static. Now, with the new subways scheduled for 2019, the latter, and the implication of the zoning, there are further pressures on the station. And in the same way that in London with Trafalgar Square, in Hong Kong, and in France, by relatively small but highly significant interventions, the accumulation of several interventions has had very dramatic effects, a kind of ripple effect on the quality of the public space. And so what we've done is really explored to what extent we can rebalance the priorities of the pedestrian against the vehicle. In the past, that was fairly well balanced, but in the changing circumstances and the growth of the car and the urbanization which has developed around, in the sense that originally it was very dominant, it's now almost been subsumed by later developments. And in a way, again, repeating the same mantra, but it has been said many times that if you want to look far ahead, you look far backwards. And it's quite interesting that if we think back to the turn of the century, in 1900 in New York, there were more vehicles powered by electric motors than any internal combustion engine. And thinking back to last week, when I was at the Paris Automobile Show, all the concept cars, the future, the most futuristic, were about either electric or hybrid. So I think there's some truth in that observation. It's quite interesting also if one goes back to some of the futuristic visions of the early 20th century. They were very much about the layered city, very much rooted also in the futuristic movement and the romance with the car, the train, and the plane. And in 1913, looking north along Park, I think one of the most extraordinary images for me, and an act of extraordinary audacity and big thinking, was the creation of what we now know as Park Avenue, with that central pedestrian spine with the roads either side, and then unbelievably buried under all those buildings that would come later. I mean, what an extraordinary act of infrastructure. And the urbanity, the street, and in that sense, a reminder that a city, its DNA, is about its infrastructure. It is about the public spaces. It's much more than the individual buildings. So again, I think there's a very enjoyable repetition of themes here in terms of the importance of the grid, and in no way to denigrate the importance of landmarks, but they are secondary to the civic experience. So if we do look forward and we consider some of the potential initiatives, again, fantastic internal space, but no external related civic spaces. So the opportunity to really create an improved pedestrian domain. Here in yellow, we could explore the potential for greater sharing of pedestrians and vehicles, the way in which we consider the texture, floor surfaces, and more dedicated pedestrian spaces. And if that is a modification of the routes, and the 42nd Street has the potential, again, for a further degree of layering dimensionally, there is the space to be able to put cars below the existing pedestrian level. That's not in a way to make it sterile. You could limit traffic to the extent of having drop-off and taxi and so on. So there are many subtle ways of modifying through greater sharing in terms of pedestrians and vehicles. But there's also the opportunity to extend the degree of pedestrianization and to create in that process two civic spaces. I don't have the pointer, but I'll come to them a little later. And finally, to improve the quality of the entrances and the access, to make the urban fabric in this area more permeable. If we focus on 42nd Street and we explore that in a little more detail, and we look at the situation at the moment, very, very congested around that. And as Brandon noted in the film, the entrance under the bridge, you really have to know where it is. But there is wonderful potential to be able to open up that facade, to remove the retail, to remove the glass, to make it an extension of the pedestrian domain, to extend it into a civic space. And again, this would be much more celebratory, not only improving its accessibility, but also transforming the appearance. And so by reducing the impact of the car in this strategic artery, then there's the potential to transform, to add landscaping, to humanize it, and again, one of several initiatives. If we look at the Helmsley building to the north, then we debated here the extent to which one might open up that in terms of making it more permeable. And of course, as we know, the pedestrian access are really very, very low tunnels. But there is the potential there to increase that height vertically. And at the same time, if it's quite restricted at the moment, then we can make that ground plan, we can make it more permeable. We can open it up, we can have cross routes, and by increasing the height of that, completely change the scale and the quality of that experience. If we go to Lexington and we look at some of the problems on the eastern entrances there, they're quite restricted, they're awkward tunnels, and again, the potential to open that up, to share pedestrian and vehicular space, and also to increase the sidewalk, which is desperately tight, and also to look at the transformation of that with more landscaping, and to create a space in front of the enlarged entrances, which would again be the same paving with devices to slow the traffic down, and to create a world between the pedestrian and the road. Again, techniques which we have used elsewhere with great success. If we look at Vanderbilt Avenue, there has been, quite rightly, because it is quite unique in terms of its circulation. It has the potential for pedestrianization. It is tight, there's no ceremonial entrance space, and of course there are too many cars. But there is the potential to make two civic spaces and to make it a pedestrian street. And that is not necessarily in conflict with the drop-off at the Yale Club, for example, opposite. So if that is how it is at the moment, and not only the Yale Club, but I did go to Yale, so. And again, a similar device of making it more permeable, making it more accessible. And if we focus in on the area around the existing entrance, we see the possibility again, the same device of removing walls, removing retail units, and again, opening that up and combining it with a civic space. So if that is as it is at the moment, then by a zoning setback in terms of the two buildings around the cross street, that could be really quite a beautiful space with ceremonial steps which would go down. And I'll come back to that in terms of the space underneath it in a moment. So looking at the lower layers in terms of Grand Central, if we come to the south, again, it's been common knowledge that the platforms are overcrowded to the point of being dangerous, that it's very, very tight in that area, and that there is the potential for greater capacity of trains, but that's restricted by the circulation spaces. So the possibility of enlarging those, getting better and grander, more, how can I say, more celebratory access to the ground plane. So if we start to look at that existing concourse underneath, and that's under 43rd Street, so the possibility of opening that with great stairways and allowing light and views through. And if we pull back on this cross-section, this is a cut through it. So again, we can see the possibility of linking these below ground levels with the concourse level. So finally, to sum up, greater permeability, better landscaping, more pedestrian-friendly spaces in the spirit of the city, and then pulling back from the immediate environment, again, the potential to link that across into the city in a wider network of improved pedestrian access. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome architecture critic for New York Magazine, Justin Davidson.
Missing a panelist? I'll get it. Are we missing a panelist? No? Are we missing a panelist?
No, we're all set. Thank you very much. I'm deeply impressed by the amount of work and observation, close observation and analysis at the very detailed fine-grained level that went into these proposals, and thank you all. And some of these images that brought up some wonderfully far-reaching questions and are range from the very detailed to the visionary grand-scale responses to the idea of rezoning the neighborhood and what should happen with Grand Central. I wanted to start specifically, Claire, with one thing I noticed about your proposal and how it relates to the zoning that we heard Amanda Burden talking about, which is that the zoning and much of the city's policy is predicated on the continuation of Grand Central as a rail mass transit hub. And as you pointed out, that condition has changed a lot over the last 100 years, and there's no reason to think it won't change again, although in ways that are unpredictable, we can't really know. So they would like to cluster development, high-rise development, and increased FAR around Grand Central. Many of your proposals, actually, but yours especially, push some of that density back from Grand Central through setbacks, through wider public access areas. So there's a little bit of this conflict, it seems to me. I'm wondering, with that as a backdrop, whether you suggest that over the long term, the specific mass transit that is at the underground level, that is the basis for the existence of Grand Central and the complexity there, could really go away. Could you follow that out a little bit more? And specifically, how adaptable is Grand Central to that idea?
Well, I think that what was really interesting about seeing all of the presentations is they were kind of demonstrations about how resilient Grand Central could be to even something as drastic as our train system, the way we know it today, being used for other kinds of transit, other kinds of communication. I think, though, the key that seems to be coming up is that if there isn't a desire to be at Grand Central on a kind of deep level, and that these kinds of making it better and connections aren't working, then ultimately people may lose interest, as they did when actually many people at MAS had to rescue and save Grand Central. Who are we to say that that won't happen again unless there is a kind of deep interest in making the zoning work for making Grand Central better? I think there has to be this, and it's not easy. You can see by all the detailed work that there's no easy answer to great new public spaces. It's very detailed work, but it feels that that kind of desire might, in fact, be a better predictor of the future than simply, going along and applying a blunt instrument such as zoning and hoping. So I think we're all saying, we're saying that zoning has to be much more precise, or there should be a public realm transportation plan that's quite precise in this case.
I want to come back to that idea, but I wanted to ask you, both of you also, whether these ideas of preserving the public room, the attractiveness of Grand Central, have a chance, if the technology changes as profoundly as that, really as profoundly as it has, again, in ways that we can't predict. If all of those underground connections become essentially obsolete, what does all the cultivation of the pedestrian realm and the public space add up to?
It's provocative.
I mean, as I understand it, the thrust of the question is to what extent can you rely on the technology of a railroad system as you look 100 years ahead, and what if that becomes obsolescent? I think the signs are good. The gauge of a railway system was invented by Stevenson with the rocket, which was 1851. And interestingly, those countries which didn't adopt that gauge, like Spain, for example, when it came to create a new high-speed rail system, went back to the gauge of Stevenson from the mid-19th century. So I think that if we've seen technology move from that early steam locomotive to the high-speed trains, the bullet trains, and even the levitating electric train with a totally new technology is still using essentially the same gauge. So I think that the medium is assured into the future, and I think I think you're right. The technology will change, and if we look at a train in 100 years' time, it'll be a very different animal from today. But the same is true, I think, of aircraft. The medium is the air, and that's not going to change. I mean, I think that the road system may end up being regulated in the same way that the airways are. And if you look at what Google's doing with the car, then you could argue that that time has already come, and that the robotic car, where we'll be reading our newspapers as we sort of go along the freeways before we come off into a local system. So I think any investment in that infrastructure is going to stand the test of time.
Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I'm glad Norman answered that question.
I think the flip side of that question is, in a way, the opposite. We have seen how much the population on an hourly basis at Grand Central has increased in the last 100 years, and we can predict with some certainty over the next few years how much that's going to increase, and you projected that into if all the FAR is built. But how adaptable is Grand Central to another order of magnitude change in the amount of traffic going through it?
There seems to be a lot of focus on Grand Central Station, and I would just like to observe that the district that's being planned for greater density is so much bigger and more encompassing than Grand Central Station. So, you know, the population density increase from the east side axis coming through Grand Central equals, in our calculations, the increased density in the zone at large. So, and it's so much bigger. You know, it's about a quarter of the dimension of Central Park, this district. So, quite large, and you know, Grand Central's great, and it's precious, and it's a landmark, and it's irreplaceable. But there's a lot of other territory in the city that is the subject of this this zoning proposal and the MAS initiative about the pedestrian. So the pedestrian realm in this whole district is material to talk about as well, I think. Yeah.
Well, so following that up, if what we have now, and I think that was a very powerful diagram that you guys made of all the pops, the sort of scatter shot of tiny public spaces that are disconnected all over the district. And that's really the product of the incentivized zoning of 1961 that tied public space to each individual building. And in a way, this is sort of version 2.0 of that, in which development pays into a kitty that is then spread out through the city. Is there a way, do we need new tools? Do we need something that is more radical than that, that goes beyond, that sort of is a whole other iteration of zoning for this area from what was done in 61 or in 1982, to not just aggregate those public spaces by connecting them, but really to do planning as well as zoning to be able to create new public spaces on across this district? I mean, I was looking at your passageways between commercial buildings, and I was thinking, well, wouldn't it be great if those could really be, instead of just little bits of connective tissue between large buildings, they could actually be, sort of have an identity, like, you know, be grand gallerias on a much greater scale. Do we have the tools, does zoning provide us with the tools we need to do that, to do any of the things that you?
I'm sure the others will add their thoughts as well, but go back to something Claire said. It's about the desire to create and enhance the public realm. And you know, if you look at the history, and I'm going to paraphrase, 1916 zoning was about creating strictures that would not occlude too much sunlight from reaching the street, so a qualitative objective. And the 61 zoning was about incentivizing these privately owned public spaces, a la the Seagram building or Lever House, so that you could sort of relieve some of the congestion of the city. So again, a qualitative condition. And perhaps what this dialogue is about is to influence the sort of qualitative aspirations of the city planning document beyond contributing to a fund. So, you know, gallerias or easements or different types of public space that you've seen from both presenters, but sort of a public aspiration, a public desire, a kind of qualitative aspiration, yeah.
You know, zoning, I think there's an ambition in the zoning to want it to create this public realm or transportation master plan that could happen, but in most cases, whether it's King's Cross or other successful kind of revitalizations of areas around major pieces of infrastructure, I think it takes a vision that the zoning and the plan is plugging into, so that all of the agencies, and there are many in Grand Central, I think, and many private interests, are able to see that there's a kind of positive outcome, and it isn't a sense of, if we move this way, I've lost, and it really takes all of that. And New York City zoning code doesn't really have that. It's much more, even our incentive, I love incentive zoning, I think it makes New York what it is. But in a sense, this zoning is, I think, trying to find its way between a paradigm of, we actually figured out ways with zoning lot mergers to keep those small buildings and move. And this zoning is saying, no, 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 we need all new things. And I think what we discovered through the process is the all new things should go somewhere really special, like this kind of setback, so this natural light happens, so that you get this kind of plaza. And I think all of these, or even something specific so that you can get the horizontal London Eye to happen. But it does feel that if that's a blanket case, that new is better, that there's, I think among architects, we should be cautious about that, as much as we all love new. So it's sort of like you want that frisson between what's really happening and new.
Don't you think that zoning here in New York, in Manhattan, has actually served the city quite well, in the sense that it has an extraordinary urbanity. And as you rightly point out, at different points in time, it's in a way offered rewards in terms of a set of rules that's about reducing overshadowing, bringing down light, rewarding civic initiatives. So I think it's very, very positive that there is a debate here, and it's recognized that the importance of learning from the past in terms of zoning, looking at the shortfalls in terms of a particular area, encouraging density, and a debate on improving the amount and the quality of public space. I think that it's also important that there is an awareness of civic design in terms of the importance of the street as a space, because what would be disastrous would be if that got whittled away, and so you really need the balance of the green spaces, a better pedestrian environment, but keeping the grid and the sense of enclosure and the variety.
I'm imagining taking all of your proposals and sort of superimposing them one on top of the other, and I'm wondering whether, not just whether that's, they're compatible, but whether if you look at all the different layers in the area, both underground, at the pedestrian level that you have all been talking about, with all the access points and aggregating public space, and then this, visionary group of buildings holding up the flying donut. And I'm glad to see that you crazy kids at SOM have really been letting your hair down. But if you can do all of those things, the planning, the large-scale high-rise construction, is it possible to do that and still maintain what I think all of us associate with that area, which is this incredible variety and diversity, including some pretty, grungy, gritty, small-scale stuff? Can that fit in with the kinds of ideas that we're talking about, both in terms of the zoning proposals, but also in terms of your plans?
I think that one of the aspects that perhaps we take for granted, but again, I think the zoning could encourage, are the activities adjacent to the sidewalk. I think that, again, the vibrancy of Manhattan is because there is so much action at the sidewalk level. I mean, and the areas which perhaps are more questionable are when they are totally anesthetized by a single use or a monolithic block. So again, I think that in exploring the fine print of the zoning, if it could be sensitive to the activities at the ground plane adjacent to the sidewalk, that too would be helpful.
And just to sort of take off from that, I think one of the reasons we're also obsessed by Grand Central, even though we understand it's East Midtown zoning, is that Grand Central, from this activity point of view, is actually rather dead. As you walk around the edges of Grand Central, considering what's going on, it's completely opaque, and it seems underwhelmingly so. And when I think about the property owners, I worry about what their rental basis is, considering there should be so much more happening. When you look at Times Square and the transformation of that, and the kinds of vitality, and around Bryant Park too, you have to question how you could remake East Midtown without remaking that life around Grand Central, and which is really about people wanting to actually do things around it, rent space and make stuff.
Are there mechanisms, or how would you imagine preserving that? We know how to intervene to change things, but here we're talking about a kind of preservation that's probably the trickiest kind, which is preserving the variety of uses and activities. We can preserve Grand Central as a physical structure, but how do you...
I'm arguing that the diversity of activities 100 years ago was so much more diverse now. We have so much more people coming to Grand Central, but there's actually, it's rather a monoculture, actually. I think it's not diverse enough, and that's something the zoning could really encourage, is having way more diverse uses in around Grand Central.
I also think that the three presenters also considered a different kind of diversity, not just from the street level up, but the different strata of public space that exists and may exist in the future even more. And you know, like the High Line, there's a diversity in how people might enjoy the city that would contribute to scale diversity and age diversity that you were talking about of the building. So I think all of those things in combination somehow would create a very rich fabric for the city.
I think one of the things that's most striking about Grand Central, when you go inside, and I actually like the surprise of the kind of very constrained streetscape right around it, and then emerging into that huge space. But the history of building a monument, a useful monument, for the sheer monumentality, for the grandeur of public life among people who a century ago, many of whom really didn't have access to that anywhere else. I mean, all of the great monuments of that area, the public library, the Metropolitan Museum, that were free and open to the public, who really didn't have that. And I just want to end by thanking you, because I think that you're all trying to recapture that spirit of finding a way to inject that sense of common grandeur and openness that in some way rubs against some of the commercial needs of the same area. Grand Central found a unique way of being able to leverage one with the other, working in both directions. And the goal, of course, is to try to reproduce that. And I think we've made great strides. So
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.